Good morning. This is Sarah Garner with the Bellevue Chamber, and we're happy to present a program via the web today, a webinar on cybersecurity, knowing that those are all important issues for our small business members. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and hand that over to Toddy Mladenov with Agitare Technologies, who's our presenter today.
Thank you, Sarah, and hi, everyone. I'm glad that actually we have this opportunity to present our cybersecurity webinar for small and medium-sized businesses together with the Bellevue Chamber of Commerce. Once again, thank you for them for inviting us to do that, and let's get started. So the first thing I would like to start with is some numbers. Those are a bunch of companies that you see on the screen. And I'm pretty sure you're already guessing what is the common thing around them. The common thing is that they all got hacked, and those are only the big names that actually you hear on the news and you see almost weekly now. And you don't hear about the small companies that actually got hacked or were involved in the bigger hacks that were very prominent lately, like WannaCry or NotPetya and something like this. But let's look at the numbers. Yahoo, 1 billion. Adobe, 152 million. Target, 70 million. Those are certainly not numbers that actually show the revenue of these companies. Those are the numbers that of the records they have exposed during the hack or the breach that happened with them. For example, Target in 2013 exposed 70 million records, which included people's first and last name, addresses, phone numbers, and among those, about 40 million credit cards and credit card numbers. In 2013, there were much more hacks, like, for example, P.F. Chang or Home Depot, and so on. It was so that actually every other week I was getting a new credit card from my bank saying, okay, the previous one is not valid because it was part of the hack or certain hack, and you cannot use it anymore. The problem with Equifax, for example, which was the most recent hack, is much bigger though. It's not just credit cards, it's all your personal information. It's not only your first name, last name, address, phone number, but it is your social security number, something that you cannot change. What does that mean? First, 143 million people in US, this is more than 50% of the US population that has a credit record. That means if not you, your life partner for sure is in that breach. But what they can do with this information is not only kind of for taking some money out of your credit card. What they can do is they can actually get a much bigger credit, buy a home, live under your identity without anybody noticing that. And they can do this for like 5 or 10 or 20 years, or you can get hacked with this information, not today, not tomorrow, but in a couple of years, and when nobody actually pays attention anymore to that. So those are kind of bigger issues that we see with breached information, but I would like you to look at the other numbers also. So 152 million from Adobe, or 69 million from Dropbox, or 165 million from LinkedIn, or billion from Yahoo. What those numbers give is actually the amount of data cyber criminals are collecting about people around the world. How they can use that data is they can actually go and create different patterns in order to recognize passwords, or how passwords are exposed. So let's see, where is that data going? So that data actually goes to the dark web, a network of websites that is actually not monitored by our government, or where people can go and actually exchange or trade this type of data. Have you been on a website called Have I Been Pwned? This is a perfectly legit website owned by a security researcher, Troy Hunt. What he does is he monitors the dark web for exposed information, and he publishes on his own website. Why? Well, awareness. So the more people know about their information and how their information is exposed, the more willing they will be to take some action. He also helps with that information to actually other security researchers to protect either people or their customers. So if you look on his website, you will see that actually he has the information from 233 website breaches happened until now, which has about 4.7 billion accounts. And with accounts, what we mean, this is the username, email, and or password for those accounts. The passwords the unique passwords that he has on his website is about 320 million passwords. So once again, think about the amount of data that is available on the dark web, 320 million passwords. With the current technology, I can tell you, so my computer, my laptop can count from 0 to 220 million in 60 seconds. And what that means is in 60 seconds, I can go and compare 220 million passwords and see whether they match a certain login. Not so much time, right? So how much time do you think the hackers take to go and crack a password? But not only that, once again, so using that data, what they can do is they can go and determine password patterns, whether you actually change your password every 60 days or 72 days. What is the kind of the algorithm that you use when you changed your password? So we've seen people like taking their previous password, taking the last character and moving in the front, and that's how they actually change the password because they don't want to forget it. Or very often people replace letters with numbers when they actually create their passwords, but the passwords actually are very simple names. Other people add, for example, special characters because sometimes those are required. But again, they, for example, replace the number 4 with $signs because on the keyboard 4 and $sign are on the same key. So very easy way to actually go and create certain patterns, and when they need to actually match passwords, they can use those patterns to do it. What else they can do is they can also match your data between different services, let's say Yahoo, Adobe, LinkedIn, and Dropbox. So if you see that actually you're using the same password on each one of those services, there is a good chance that you may be using that password also on your bank account. So keep that in mind. Now let's talk a little bit more numbers. This screen is a very scary screen. This is the screen from the ransomware that happened a couple of months ago called WannaCry. So what is ransomware? We'll talk about this a little bit later, but ransomware is a piece of software that you get implanted on your PC and encrypts all the data, so you don't have access to your data. And the only way to actually get your access back is to pay a small ransom. And if you see here, it says send $300 worth of Bitcoin, and we'll give you the key to decrypt your data. Coming back to the numbers, this ransomware impacted 150 countries around the world and 400,000 machines. And with a small ransom of $300, you can imagine that a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises or even normal people can afford to actually pay that and get their data back. Luckily, the ransomware was stopped by a security researcher, and a fix was found because apparently that was done by really not very experienced hackers. But the amount of data and the scale actually of this attack was the staggering part here. Not only that, but for example, big companies like Renault, Deutsche Bank, Petrobras, FedEx, Nissan, Hitachi, or Russian Central Bank they all got impacted by this ransomware. The most serious impact was in the National Health Services in UK, where 48 hospitals were closed because major systems were impacted. So they had to turn down surgeries and other essential or urgent care services because they were not able to handle their visitors. Now, so once again, these are big numbers. The question is why things like, for example, WannaCry happen. One of the things is the use of old operating system. So 90% of NHA facilities, which they use Windows XP, which is a 16-year-old operating system, and it's not supported by Microsoft anymore. The other problem is that not only they use old OSs, but they don't actually patch the OSs. The vulnerability in the operating system was discovered 3 months or 91 days before the attack happened. And Microsoft released a fix for that vulnerability 59 days, which is almost 2 months before the actual attack. So if the security or the IT teams in those enterprises have patched their systems, or if they made sure that they're running modern operating system, this attack would not happen. The problem is that actually after WannaCry, we had immediately another attack which exploited the same vulnerability. And this other attack, called the NotPetya attack, impacted another set of big enterprises like Maersk, the global shipping enterprise, the glass manufacturer Saint-Gobain, the US pharmaceutical company Merck, and so on. The shipping company Maersk itself reported $300 million loss as a result of the attack. Well, once again, I would like to mention that these two attacks, they were actually really made possible or made by very inexperienced teams. They both actually were very easy to discover by security researchers, and as I said, WannaCry was even prevented from further spreading, and it was fixed after that. But if some like young hacker can do such a damage, you can imagine what more experienced hackers can do. Let's talk now why, for example, hackers would like to target small and medium-sized enterprises. Why wouldn't they go after just the big fish where they can get a lot of money or do the most damage? So a couple of reasons. The IT in the small and medium enterprises is not so experienced. So the IT personnel may be like just a single person who is supporting your laptops and desktop computers. SMBs cannot afford to have a dedicated security team. So even if like large enterprises like Maersk or Mondelez or Yahoo cannot stop such type of attacks and breaches, what is it for a small guys like mom and pop shops? The next thing is like employees in the small and medium-sized enterprises. They're not well trained like the employees in the bigger enterprises. Nobody actually has in a small size enterprise training classes for especially for security. While, for example, companies like Microsoft or Boeing, every year they require their employees to take security classes. Not only that, but for example, employees in the small enterprises, they are not very familiar with the technologies. For example, how to use multi-factor authentication in order to protect their user account. They rely very often on simple 8-character passwords, and it's much easier to impersonate them. The other thing is like small and medium-sized businesses, they can afford to pay small ransom amounts. So $300, as I said, that's not a lot. Paying $300 to get all your data that your business depends on, yeah, a lot of people will do that. But the most importantly, the small enterprises can gain or give access to the bigger enterprises. Very often, small and medium-sized businesses, they are vendors to big companies like Boeing or Adobe or Mondelez and so on. If hackers can gain access to the small and medium-sized businesses, they can very easily infiltrate also the big ones. Think about the following scenario. Your company is a supplier for a bigger enterprise. They infiltrate your network and are able to install malware on your employees' machines. This malware can be anything from like keylogger that records everything that this employee types on the keyboard, to a ransomware time bomb that actually gets activated when enough number of those pieces of software are installed. Then your employee goes to the enterprise, bigger enterprise premises. They connect to their network because they need to do some work there, and voila, the hackers are in. Easily hackable infrastructure is always useful for the hackers. They can just sit around and monitor your communication until something useful comes out. Or they can just use your IT infrastructure to spread additional malware or mine bitcoins or to serve malicious advertisement to other internet users. There are a lot of ways that you can they can use you without you knowing that. Who are those cyber criminals? So there are three big types or flavors of cyber criminals. The first one is the hacktivists, or those are people who support certain political movements or share certain political views. They can vary from hackers supporting Greenpeace, who are interested in kind of hacking companies that pollute the air or the nature, to one supporting terrorist organizations like, for example, Islamic State. So their goal is, for example, to deface certain websites to spread their message more. For example, let's say manufacturing can become a target of hackers supporting the environment, as I mentioned, or Islamic State can go and deface a bunch of government or big companies' websites in order to spread their terrorist message. This thing actually happened a couple of weeks ago with one of the US government sites. The next one is the so-called state-sponsored hackers. The state-sponsored hackers are sponsored by particular government, including the US government, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and so on. Their goal is actually to attack companies or infrastructure which is in their opposing state, things that actually we've seen lately, like for example the election hacks. But how does that impact the small businesses? Well, if you are a government contractor and you are doing work for the government, you may be targeted because, for example, this is one way to get in the government infrastructure. And they are the so-called plain cyber criminals. Well, they're not plain. They are well-educated individuals or organizations who use their knowledge for evil, unfortunately. They are mostly driven by financial goals and realizing gains with as much as little effort as possible. SMBs are ideal targets for them because the effort is minimal. Hacking SMB infrastructure doesn't require so much work. For example, the WannaCry gain they realized was around $130,000, not so much based on the numbers that we've seen before, but this is the salary for 5 to 6 years for a software engineer in Eastern Europe. So I think that's pretty good salary. What are the types of cyber attacks that small and medium-sized businesses should be afraid of? We already talked about the ransomware. It's once again, this is a piece of software that gets implanted or on your computer, encrypts all the data, and you don't have access to your data anymore. Phishing or spear phishing, this is the goal to actually make a user click on a link to a malicious website where they can go and steal your credentials. I will give you an example for this a little bit later when we talk about the email. Business email compromise. This, according to FBI, is a $5 billion industry, and 85% of the enterprises are targeted with business email compromise. What that means is, or the scenario here is very often that a company where the CFO receives an email from their CEO with the request to transfer money to some new vendor's account. Most of the time, this is actually a very malicious request. The email that the CFO or the controller in the company receives is looks very much like the email from the CEO. Even it comes from the CEO email address, and the wording inside it's a very similar to how the CEO behaves. So they monitor your communication for a while to understand how you communicate internally in the company, and then they can craft a very good message that looks very legit when you receive it in your email box. The next one is crypto mining. So cryptocurrencies are very popular lately, but they require resources for actually creating them. Any available resource can be used by the hackers to mine cryptocurrencies. So they can use your servers to do that, and you don't even notice. It's not something that actually you see or understand somehow. Because it's a piece of software running on your servers and just taking out of your CPU cycles. They actually, the impact for you is that actually your infrastructure is used for that. So you pay for that infrastructure. Maybe your website or your accounting server is not running well, or it has a bad performance because cryptocurrency mining is very resource intensive. The next one is adware. So if you get infected, you will start receiving advertisements when you go to different websites that actually make money for those hackers. Those are very easily done, for example, either implanting this on your server, web server, or if one of your employees gets to a malicious website where they can actually get their machine infected. Last but not least are the so-called distributed denial of service attacks, which I would say SMBs are not very often target of that, but the infrastructure that SMBs are using, the IT infrastructure, can be part of such attack. Especially lately, IoT attacks or DDoS attacks are very popular, and IoT devices used by manufacturing companies can be part of these bigger DDoS attacks. Now let's talk how can you protect your business. So we see three areas where you can actually immediately invest to protect your business from cyber attacks. The first one is, of course, the employees. You need to make sure employees are well educated and follow best practices for digital security. The next one is the internal communication. The internal communication between the employees as well as the external one between your company and your vendors and customers needs to be secure and should not be exposed and misused. Protecting your email, because this is one of the most used communication ways, is essential to protect your company. Last is your infrastructure. You need to make sure that your physical and IT infrastructure are also protected. Because we are talking about cyber attacks, your website is actually the front door for your company, and you should not leave it open. So you need to make sure that you protect your website well. In the next few slides, I will give you a few bullet points to use as a checklist in each of those areas. So let's start with the employees. So security training. As we said, it's hard for small and mid-sized businesses to do security training for their employees. but there are things that you need to make sure they are following. For example, strong passwords and using password managers. Things like using longer passwords, adding additional lower and uppercase characters to the password, adding numbers to the password and special characters, it's a requirement now. Because the reason people are actually using simple passwords or passwords that are easily crackable is because they need to remember those. Well, the use of password manager helps a lot. So the password manager keeps your employees' passwords very secure, and they can use it to go and log in there. So you don't need to actually remember this password. The other things for example, password expiration. So users or employees need to make sure that they update their password every now and then. And what is actually a good time frame? So different companies use different times for that, but they vary between 45 and 72 days at the maximum. So every month and a half to maybe 2 months and a half, you should make sure that your employees are changing their passwords. Another thing is not clicking on email links. Well, it's surprising that actually although a lot of people know that 75% of them admit of doing it. So if they see you a link in an email, they are quite willing to actually click on it. There are ways that you can actually ensure that they don't do that. One is, and we'll talk a little bit later when we talk about email protection, but one of the ways is to ask them to, instead clicking on the link, to copy the link and paste it and make sure that the link contains the expected website there. And of course, website visits. So visiting websites that are not really related to your business, browsing to websites that actually have some questionable content there, those things, they should be prevented. So we will talk a little bit later how you can prevent this using certain technologies. Then the other thing that you can do for your employees is to protect their laptops and workstations. A couple of things there. One is drive encryption. Both Mac and OS, Mac OS and Windows OSs, they have a way to actually encrypt the drive. Why is this necessary? Well, if the laptop gets stolen, or if there is a break-in in your office and all the computers get stolen, they actually cannot read the data that is on their hard drives. So the only thing that they can do is just to format the hard drives, and they cannot gain access to your data. You can also run security software like anti-malware or anti-ransomware on your employees' machines to make sure that even if they go to some malicious website or they get somehow infected, this gets automatically removed. Companies like Symantec, Sophos, or SentinelOne can be actually contracted to install agents on your employees' computers, and this runs without their any additional intervention. Another one is files and folders backup, and things like, for example, in the case of ransomware, the only way to get your data is back if you don't get the key, and if you don't want to pay ransom, is if you have a recent backup. The most problems that we see with backups is that people don't do backups often, and they don't test actually their backups on a regular basis. But coming back to the ransomware part, for example, sometimes, and recently we've seen that, is even people who pay ransom, they don't get the key, and they lose their money and they lose their data. Last but not least, of course, is you need to make sure that your employees are regularly updating their machines. I understand that this is like not something that they are interested in doing, and even my wife, every time I sit on her machine, I need to go and update it. Luckily, I sit at least once a month on her machine, and this is the recommended period for updating your employees' machines. So Microsoft and other companies like Adobe, they release regular updates to their software every month, the so-called Patch Tuesday. Of course, there are the so-called zero-day patches that you need to go and install immediately, because this is considered a very serious vulnerability. But minimum once a month, your employees need to update their machines. Now, let's look at the email protection. Look at this particular screen. Imagine that you receive this email in your inbox, and it looks very legit. It comes from Bank of America. Even hackers can impersonate the email, and the domain that it comes from can look like Bank of America. But if you look at this activate link, well, it points to not to Bank of America, because the URL is missing one A. So it is very easy to send such type of email, and the reason for that is because the companies, they don't protect their email domains properly, and second, people who are receiving such type of emails, they can very easily be cheated to click on that particular link. And this particular link may have actually request to type your username and password, and now you are done. So your Bank of America username and password is gone to the hackers. How can we protect the email? So there are basic protection practices for the email. So everybody knows the strong email passwords, right? We already talked about that. 8-letter passwords that are only lowercase letters and are the name of your dog are not helpful. Creating a strong passwords like 15 to 20 characters, using special characters, upper and lower case characters, and numbers is a requirement. For example, Office 365 supports up to 20 characters, and you can put policies there to say, I would like to actually make our employees type strong passwords. But passwords are not enough. Additional thing that you can add is the so-called multi-factor authentication. When you turn this thing on, there are a couple of ways that actually you can do it for your employees. One is they can go and type their username and password, but every time they do that, they are receiving also a text message giving them a temporary code that is valid for about a couple of minutes, and they need to type this temporary code in order to log in. Another way is there are the so-called authenticator apps that give you the code, and this code changes every minute. It's a little bit inconvenient if you ask your employees, but that increases the security significantly. There is also advanced email protection that you can do. The advanced email protection includes, like, for example, email rules. You can configure email rules on your mail server to, for example, flag every email that is not coming from your company or from one of your vendors. Configuring those rules is relatively easy. We, for example, have rules in our email server which flag every external email as external, and every email that comes from free email services like Gmail or Outlook.com as non-trusted email. One thing that you can do is you can actually go and list all your vendors and customers' domains, and every email that comes from a domain that is not in that list, the so-called whitelist, you can flag or even put in quarantine, and one person can go and review those emails and only send the ones that are legit. Of course, there are better ways to do that. They are the so-called DMARC, DKIM, and SPF records. So DMARC is actually automated way to do what I just described with the rules. If you set up the necessary records for your email server, a lot of things like spam will be avoided, as well as any messages that are coming from non-trusted domains. The last one is the so-called email firewall, which can be additional either device or virtual device that actually is put on front of your email that captures all the emails and has more sophisticated rules that you can configure there for filtering the email and not forwarding to your employees. Now let's look at the website protection. I have one picture, and because we are picking up on Bank of America, I actually went there and scanned their website. So this is a tool provided by Mozilla, and they provide these web security guidelines. So you can go and search on the Mozilla website. But there are about 11 tests or 11 things that you need to do on your website in order to prevent things like, for example, hijacking your website or putting malicious software on your website. So as you can see, Bank of America is not doing pretty well. So they are failing about 6 of the 11 tests, and they are pretty serious. What that means is that a hacker can go and actually put this, use their website to spread, for example, malware, or they can very easily impersonate their website and trick you to actually enter information thinking that this is the Bank of America's website, and this way steal your banking credentials. We do tests and we also provide help to customers how to fix those vulnerabilities, but as I said, so your website is one of your front doors, and you need to make sure that it is protected. Let's look at a couple of ways you can protect your website. So the basic protection is, of course, HTTPS. Starting next month, Google, with their latest version of Chrome, will start flagging every site that doesn't actually support HTTPS. They will not, or they will flag every site that is not using secure connection for communication. Doesn't matter whether this website is e-commerce website, they will actually do that. Not only that, but they will also lower your search ranking if your website is not supporting HTTPS, which is the secure protocol for internet or for web. What that means is that in searches, your company will come lower and also will have a big red cross or flag. We don't know yet how will that look, but next to the name and saying this website is not secure. Secure passwords, of course, once again, and I think this is coming again and again and again, secure passwords are very important. Make sure that your website or the server that your website is running on has secure website, a secure password. Also, if your website, for example, is WordPress, make sure that the WordPress admin password is secure and the username is not just admin. One funny thing is that actually the Equifax, the hack that happened, turned out that they had like admin username and admin password on their server, and that was one of the reasons hackers got in very, very easily. And of course, keep your website up to date, whether it will be the server OS software or whether it will be the web framework that is running on it. Make sure that you go and update it more often than even every month. Recently, for example, WordPress had one vulnerable plugin that impacted 200,000 WordPress sites. And keep in mind that more than 25% of the websites that are run around the world, they use WordPress. So patching your WordPress website is, of course, a requirement. And of course, advanced protection is, we already talked about the Mozilla security guidelines. So implementing those security guidelines on your website makes your website much more secure. And as I said, so HTTPS is not enough. You need to do some additional work on that to make it sure it is secure. And adding firewalls and additional protection around your website. If you have the resources and the money for that, that's also advised. So what to do if you get breached? Well, the first advice is don't do what Equifax did. So they handled their response to the breach very poorly, and that's why they got such a big backlash around it. But the first thing you need to do is to assess the situation. So figure out what exactly happened. How did the breach happen? You don't have too much time for that. If it is a ransomware, for example, you need to be very, very fast. If it is a data breach, you need to understand how much data leaked and where from. The next thing is prevent further spread of the attack. Once again, ransomware, if you figure out that one of your machines in the office is infected with ransomware, make sure you disconnect this machine from the network. If it is a data breach, take the database offline as well as any other database that you have. I know that there will be impact to your business because you will not be able to serve that, but you need to protect any additional data that you have. If one of the databases is breached, then there is a good chance any other database is also breached. Notify your vendors and customers. You need to do that immediately so they can also do their own investigation. Maybe the breach came from one of your vendors. They need to make sure that this gets fixed on their side. Also, they need to protect also their data. It's better if you actually do that as immediately than to wait 6 weeks and then you figure out that not only your data but also their data is gone. And of course, involve security professionals to do additional forensics and so on. So this is everything I had for today. And one thing that actually I would like to offer to every participant in this webinar is to invite you to get a security report for your own company. Going to this link, we can provide you a security report that includes 3 things. First thing that we do is we do a dark web scan for any employee data that is available on the dark web using your corporate domain. The second thing that we do is we assess your email domain protection and the necessary records that you need to create there, and we give you advice how you can improve that. And the third thing is we also assess your website using the Mozilla security guidelines and tell you how you rank with your website and what else you can do to actually improve the security of your website. So thank you for that. Going back to you, Sarah, and I think we have a couple of questions on the chat. Let me take a look at those. So any questions? If you want actually to ask questions, there is a chat room where you can actually send questions. Sarah, Jim, are you still there?
Oh, yes, of course. We're just seeing if there's any questions, and if they're not, I think we'll wrap this up. And thank you very much, Toddy, for your presentation today. And of course, anyone out there who has any needs or questions can either contact us here at the Chamber or you directly, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for inviting us. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.